guys, and welcome back to my channel for another midweek mystery video, where this week I've got another solved case for you. I know you guys really like a solved case, you're always asking for them. I personally prefer the mysteries, but I'm going to listen. I'm going to try and do a few more solved when I can. So this week we've got the story of a young girl who was cut down before her prime. Everyone has the person, the celebrity that they really look up to and they admire. But what really happens when that admiration turns into more of an obsession? What if the wrong person remains completely unchecked in their obsession with this person? Especially in a time before stalking was ever illegal. This is the story of Rebecca Schaeffer, who was born on the 6th of November 1967 in Eugene, Oregon. She was the only child to her parents Dana and Benson Schaeffer, and she was raised in a very solidly Jewish household. As a child, she had aspirations to one day become a rabbi, but this soon took a step to the side when she discovered that she had a massive passion for drama. And she actually ends up becoming a teen model. It was a hairdresser who actually put this idea of becoming a model into her head. She was just beautiful. This young girl, she had this beautiful hair, this smile that just like glowed from within. And the hairdresser said, like, I know somebody who runs a modelling agency, would you be interested? And Rebecca said yeah, and it all went off from there. She was just the epitome of beauty in the 80s. She had these big, huge curls, perms are all the rage. She had this bright smile. She was just like the girl next door. So beautiful, all natural. And so while she was in school, she becomes a catalogue model. She appears in obviously catalogues, television commercials. She's even an extra in films. And she really loves it. By 1984, it seems like things are really beginning to take off for Rebecca and her modelling career. And she knows if she wants to pursue this any further, then she can't stay in Oregon. She has to go out and make things happen for herself. And she was sure she was going to make the big time. She had to be where the action was happening though, and this was New York City. So in the summer of 1984, she manages to persuade her parents to allow her to go off to New York City to work and live for the summer. And this is with Elite Model Management. And so Rebecca goes over there for the summer and just falls in love with the city. By the end of the summer, her parents can see that she's absolutely fallen in love with the city. She's fallen in love with her work, and so her parents ask her if she wants to stay. And her mum later said this was like one of the hardest things she's ever done, like her 16-year-old daughter literally living the other side of this huge country. And she said that she cried herself to sleep for like 9 months. She found it so difficult, but Rebecca was having such a great time, and of course she did want to stay. Rebecca was very mature for her age. She wasn't just your standard 16-year-old, like she had her head very much screwed on. And as a model, if you don't hit the big time when you're young, you're probably never going to do it. And Rebecca at 16 was the prime age for this. So she stayed in the city indefinitely. Once the decision was made that she was staying, she actually moves into an apartment with a bunch of other models. I think there was like 5 or 6 other models living in this 2-bedroom apartment. It was New York, there's not much space. She attends a professional children's school, which was originally founded to provide an education to young people who are working in the New York entertainment industry. So we're talking modelling, Broadway, TV. Whilst most children would be completely out of their depth living in Manhattan, Rebecca seems to take to it like a fish to water. Apparently on the first night she was there, she was walking down the streets and she begins to get harassed by this guy who literally like goes up to her and fondles her. And Rebecca just turns around, punches this guy square in the face and just continues walking. While she's in New York, Rebecca decides to not only focus on her modelling, she wants to be on TV as well. She wants to get back into acting. And so she signs up with an acting agency and really quickly nabs a short run on a soap called One Life to Live as a character called Annie Barnes. And she's actually on the soap for 6 months. Now for someone who was as new as Rebecca to this whole world, it was really impressive that she was able to get onto this soap so quickly. I mean, so many girls aspire to be actresses, but Rebecca was out there and she was making it happen. But whilst her acting career seemed to be going great, her modelling career wasn't doing so well. You see, Rebecca was pretty short for a model. She was 5'7", about 2 inches shorter than the industry standard for high fashion modelling. Sure, she had this beautiful face, which was ideal for the catalogue modelling she was doing back in Eugene, but in New York, people were looking for high fashion models, and Rebecca was just too short. And she was too youthful as well. She was too girl next door. This just wasn't what the agencies were looking for, and once she finishes her stint on TV, she really struggles to find work. And so in 1985, when she was just 17 years old, she decides to take another risk. She decides to move to Tokyo in Japan. Her agency tells her she might have more success over there, and so she just goes with it. The requirements were pretty different in Tokyo, and the whole girl next door look was all the rage, but still, because of her height, she struggles to find some work, and so she heads again back to New York, and she decides from now on she's going to focus all of her energy on acting. That is what she wants to do. And this does work out for her. She actually manages to nab a small part in Woody Allen's Radio Days and also on Steven Spielberg's Amazing Stories. But I mean, she's not making a living out of this. She's still having to work as a waitress on the side to sort of like fund her acting. But then one last modelling job comes through, and she actually manages to land the cover of 17 magazine. And this beautiful girl on the cover of this magazine manages to catch the attention of TV producers over in LA, who are casting for a new show called My Sister Sam. They contact Rebecca's agents and ask her to do a screen test, and she does, and she very easily wins the role of Patty Russell. She was playing Patty, the younger sister of 29-year-old Sam, who lived in San Francisco, and their parents had recently died. So Patty had moved from Oregon to San Francisco to live with her sister, and it was just about their lives together. At the time Rebecca was casted, she was living in a New York apartment with 6 other girls, and she'd actually recently had her phone disconnected because she couldn't pay for it anymore, and she was really struggling. So when she actually lands the role of Patty, her agent can't even get in contact with her, so has to leave a note on her apartment door saying that she's landed the role, she needs to call her, and that Rebecca's moving to LA. So Rebecca moves to the West Coast in 1986, and just like that, Rebecca Schaeffer shoots to fame. My Sister Sam aired once a week on CBS, and it was a relative success in its first season, becoming the 21st highest rated show, which doesn't sound too impressive, the 21st, but for a sort of pilot season, the first season, this was very, very good. And Rebecca was a delight apparently to have on the set of the show. She was always curious, always wanting to learn. She was always like asking everyone on set about their jobs and how it worked. She wasn't just like a little starlet who would throw tantrums and sit in her dressing room all day. Like, she wanted to be out, and she was always happy, always smiling. She was this really rare mixture of complete maturity. Like, for her age, she was like 17, 18 at this time, but she was also like a shining beacon of youth. She lived in a rented house in California by herself, perhaps after sharing with so many people for so long. She just wanted to have a little bit of her own space. Some speculate that she was quite lonely though, living on her own, scared by like the vastness of California. But Rebecca liked a quiet life. She was sensitive, and she was kind of a loner as well. Like, she really appreciated her alone time. That's not to say she didn't get along with people, she really did, but she just liked being on her own. So whilst the first season of My Sister Sam does really, really well, the second season just doesn't. It was shifted to a Saturday night, which in TV language is basically saying that it's gonna go down the drain. It always leads to a downfall in ratings because people are usually out on Saturday night, or if they're not out, they're sitting in watching one of the more like established TV shows. Everyone has their standard Saturday night viewings. They're not going to watch a second season of this little sitcom. So the ratings plummet, and CBS cancels it very, very abruptly, leaving 12 episodes completely unaired. And Rebecca, of course, was devastated by this. But My Sister Sam had opened up a door for her, and now people knew who she was. She wasn't just this unknown actress. She had been on TV. So despite the cancellation, her life was going pretty well. She had a boyfriend, a man called Brad Silberling, who she actually met on a blind date at a UCLA screening of his student thesis. You might actually recognise Brad's name. I knew that I did when I read about this, and it really bugged me. He went on to become a really successful film and TV director, and you've probably seen some of Brad's work. Most notably, he's recently directed Jane the Virgin, which is one of my favourite TV shows. He and Rebecca would date kind of on and off from 1987 to her death in 1989. But now a door had been opened for Rebecca. Hollywood knew who she was. She goes to Egypt to star in a film called Voyage of Terror, and she features in scenes in a movie called The Class Struggle in Beverly Hills. Rebecca tended to be typecast in the younger sister kind of role, which I suppose was solidified by her being cast as the younger sister in My Sister Sam. She was actually considered for the now iconic lead role in Pretty Woman, but she was considered too young, too girlish, and so so the role actually went to Julia Roberts instead. But Julia Roberts was actually ironically only 9 days older than Rebecca. But that's just to give you a kind of idea of how well Rebecca was doing in Hollywood at the time. Like, she had her name out there. And look at what Julia Roberts has gone on to do since Pretty Woman. She is now one of the biggest actresses, I suppose you could say, in Hollywood. Would Rebecca be as much of a household name if she hadn't met her death so early? On the day of her death in 1989, Rebecca was actually set to read for the role of Mary Corleone in The Godfather Part 3. Rebecca was at home that morning waiting for a script to be delivered. Like, she was set to do big things. She was on the fast track to pretty big fame. But someone else had another idea. Robert John Bardo had grown up in Tucson, Arizona as the youngest of 7 siblings, and he dealt with a lot of physical and emotional abuse from quite a young age at the hands of one of his siblings. At one point he's even placed in foster care after he threatens to commit suicide. Perhaps as an escape from his far from perfect life, Bardo exhibited an abnormal fascination on female celebrities from a very young age. According to one of his teachers, Bardo was a time bomb on the verge of exploding, which begs the question, if people knew that he was a time bomb, why did they not do anything about it? His first female obsession was with a girl called Samantha Smith, who was actually a young schoolgirl who became famous after sending a letter to Soviet leader Yuri Andropov. And she basically sent a letter trying to understand the relations between the Soviet Union and the USA at the time. She writes, "Dear Mr. Andropov, my name is Samantha Smith. I'm 10 years old. I have been worrying about Russia and the United States going into a nuclear war. Are you going to vote to have a war or not?" And Yuri receives this letter, and it actually ends up published in the Soviet newspaper called Pravda. And Yuri does eventually reply to her, and this letter just shoots to fame because there was a lot of sort of like tension between the two countries at the time. A lot of people thinking there was going to be a nuclear war. It was the middle of the Cold War. And Samantha just really touches people's hearts in both the Soviet Union and the USA with her letter. And so she becomes famous as a peace activist and a goodwill ambassador. Kind of everyone knew Samantha Smith's name around this time. But Bardo becomes obsessed with this 11-year-old girl. He's about 13 at the time, and he's sending her relentless letters. And he actually even boards a bus to Maine to go and find her, but the authorities find him in time and return him back to Tucson before he can actually do any harm. Samantha actually ends up dying in a plane crash when she was 13 years old, and so Bardo sort of very quickly shifts his attention to other famous females. I mean, people around him knew what he was like. People knew that he had these very intense obsessions with female celebrities. I mean, and people knew that he was going to meet them as well. Like, he got on a bus to go find Samantha, who was literally a child. But people kind of brushed it off because what harm could he really do? Although very clearly disturbed, Bardo was a fairly good student. He did quite well in school when he actually went to school. But he would write his teachers very threatening letters, and he was actually hospitalised twice due to severe emotional damages. He was later diagnosed with bipolar disorder. At age 16 and a high school dropout now, he becomes a janitor at a fast food restaurant called Jack in the Box. And that is actually the same year that My Sister Sam airs on TV. And Bardo quickly shifts all of his attention onto Rebecca Schaeffer, the fresh-faced, beautiful girl next door who was now on his TV every single week. And it wasn't Rebecca per se, the actress, that drew all his attention. He was actually, at the start, obsessed with her character, Patty. He builds a shrine to Patty in his bedroom, but this slowly sort of morphs into more of a Rebecca shrine instead. And he loved the loving, sweet, innocent teenager that she portrayed. And so he begins to write letters to Rebecca, and he collects videos of every single sort of time that Rebecca's on TV. He's recording it, he's got the video, even goes back and finds her really, really old TV stuff. Now, back in Hollywood, Rebecca was a really humble girl. She hadn't let fame go to her head at all, and she wanted to reply to as many fan letters as she possibly could. She'd been suddenly thrust into the limelight, and she felt she owed it to the people who watched her to reply to their letters, and that is what she did. But she had sort of her stock response, something easy that she could say that would satiate her fans who were writing letters without having to spend too much time thinking of personalised responses, because this would take up a lot of time. And so she responded to all of her fans with a postcard-sized headshot and a little note. And the note to Bardot read, "Yours is one of the nicest letters I've received," which was something she would send as a stock response to pretty much everyone. Nowadays, celebrities are very careful with what sort of responses they give to fan letters, using Rebecca's story as a grisly tale, a grisly reminder to keep people at arm's length. I mean, you've got to keep things impersonal as to not encourage any over-the-top feelings, but not too impersonal that it would anger them. And for somebody who's as clearly unstable as, say, Robert Bardo, even no reply could trigger this huge anger. Nowadays, a lot of celebrities tend to reply with just a headshot and a signature, just a straightforward autograph. But back in the 80s, Rebecca felt like she owed it to them to like give them a note. And then there's social media today as well, which is something I wouldn't even want to imagine somebody like Robert Bardo having access to. And I'm sure there are many, many people out there like Robert Bardo who do use social media as sort of like a direct access to celebrities. That level of instant communication can be dangerous. The day that Robert Bardo receives his response from Rebecca that his is the nicest letter she's ever received, he writes in his diary, "When I think of her, I would like to become famous to impress her." He is fueled by this response, believing that now she knows who he is and that if he was just to meet her, then his feelings would become reciprocated. And so that is what he intends to do. He intends to meet her. It's June of 1987 and Bardot decides to head to California to meet Rebecca. He goes straight to the Warner Brothers lot where My Sister Sam was filmed, and he's carrying a teddy bear and a bunch of roses. And he approaches the guards intending on being let in, but of course the guards don't let him in. He's just this weird guy carrying a teddy and roses. He approaches the guards fully thinking that they're just gonna let him into the studio, but of course they turn him away. And the security chief that he spoke to actually later said that he thought Bardot was just a little lovesick puppy, but he was terribly, terribly insistent on being let in, and apparently Rebecca Schaeffer came out of his mouth every 2 seconds. He was very clearly obsessed. But luckily they do have the sense to turn him away, but this just angers Bardot, and so a month later he returns again, this time with a knife in his bag, and once again he is also turned away. And he also places multiple calls to the Warner Brothers lot, insisting that all of his messages need to be given to Rebecca, telling her that he's in love with her and he just wants to meet her and all of this. Of course, throughout all of this, she is none the wiser. She has no idea that any of this is going on because the security just don't really say anything. They do pass the message on to the studio head, who would have sort of like dealt more directly with Rebecca, but it's not thought that Rebecca was ever actually told that she did have this guy, because I'm sure a lot of people who filmed at this Warner Brothers lot had people who were obsessed with them. It was just sort of the thing. Around this time, Bardo writes in his diary, "I don't lose, period." But Bardo goes back to Tucson, having had no luck in meeting Rebecca, and his obsession kind of shifts slightly. He moves on to pop singers of the 80s, and this is just like hilariously 80s. He's obsessed with Debbie Gibson, Madonna and Tiffany, and he's just bombarding them with love letters all of the time. And psychologists will actually say that obsessive love letters are much more worrying than hate mail. So a while passes, Bardo kind of puts Rebecca to the back of his mind, more focused on Tiffany and Debbie and Madonna. And in 1989, Bardo actually watches the comedy The Class Struggle in Beverly Hills, in which Rebecca is featured. There's a scene in the film in which Rebecca's character appears in bed with another male actor, and this sparks something new in Bardo, and the scene absolutely enrages him. He writes in his diary that Rebecca has just become another Hollywood whore and one more of the bitches of Hollywood. His sweet, innocent young Rebecca has now become an adult woman, and he cannot stand it. She was supposed to stay innocent for him, wait for him, and now she needs to be punished for her immorality. At this time, Robert Bardo is 19 years old. He mails an ominous sounding letter to his sister in Tennessee, telling her that if he couldn't have Rebecca, no one could. It read, "I have an obsession with the unattainable, and I have to eliminate something that I cannot attain." On the 17th of July 1989, Bardo calls Rebecca's agent's office to try and find her address. Like, brazenly just calls up her agents and like, "Hey, can I have Rebecca's address?" Of course, they refused to share this information with him. But this is okay. Bardot had recently learned about a man called Arthur Jackson from an article in People magazine. And now Arthur Jackson had actually stalked and stabbed actress Teresa Saldana in West Hollywood in 1982. Luckily, Teresa survived her attack. Jackson had used a private investigator to obtain Teresa's details, including her address, and Bardo decides that this is what he's going to do as well. He approaches a private detective agency in Tucson, telling them that he's looking for an old friend, and he pays them $250 to get Rebecca's address, and they provide this to him very, very quickly. But what he didn't realise is that he actually very easily could have done this himself for just a few dollars. If you go to the DMV, you just have to fill in this form requesting information. You say what information you want, how you intend to use it, why you want it, and it doesn't matter really what you put. The DMV will just give you any address of anyone that you want. And it's through this exact avenue that the private investigators got the address themselves. And Bardo also attempts to purchase a gun, but due to his history of mental health issues, he's denied. He actually has to go into the gun shop and fill in this form, and he openly checks on the form that he has got mental health issues, and he's also underage at the time, but he had a fake driver's license, which they seem to accept. Obviously, the sales assistant at the gun shop denies the purchase because Bardo's openly said that he's got mental health issues, and Bardo gets irate. He is so angry. He's shouting at this guy, demanding that he can fill in another form, and the guy's like, no, you've already said you've got mental health issues. You can't just fill out another form. So Bardo leaves. He's got no other choice. He's not going to get a gun that way, and the sales assistant actually hangs up Bardo's form on the bulletin board with a big note saying, do not sell to this person. But Bardo's not bothered because he just goes home and manages to persuade his older brother to buy the gun for him instead. His older brother goes into the store with Bardo by his side and manages to buy a .357 Magnum handgun. And obviously this was hugely illegal. You can't buy a gun for somebody else, but his brother did it anyway. And his brother was actually never charged with this, but there's quite solid arguments that he probably should have been charged. And so, with the gun and Rebecca's address, Bardo boards a bus to Hollywood with one goal in mind: find Rebecca Schaeffer. It's July 18th, 1989, and Bardo rings Rebecca's doorbell. He's already walked around the street a couple of times with a photo of Rebecca, just double checking that this is where she lived. He wanted to be really sure that he wasn't going to embarrass himself and go to the wrong house. And so he's very sure that this is the correct house when he walks up to Rebecca's doorbell. He rings a bell, and Rebecca's intercom actually wasn't working that day, so she has to head down from her apartment to the apartment building's front door and open it. She's expecting it to be the Godfather 3 script that she's been in all day waiting for, but it's not. It's Robert Bardo. Now, Rebecca's obviously a little bit weirded out by this random guy appearing on her doorstep, but she's nice enough to him. He actually shows her the letter he'd written to her all those years earlier and the note that she'd replied with, and they have quite a short, brief conversation, but she eventually shakes his hand, wishes him a nice day, and asks him not to come back before closing the door. And Bardo is so disarmed by this entire conversation that he kind of just walks away. But Bardo is infuriated by the entire interaction because Rebecca was supposed to fall in love with him. That was the plan. She wasn't supposed to just shake his hand, wish him a good day and tell him not to come back. He's furious. And so he walks to a nearby restaurant where he orders onion rings and cheesecake for lunch, and he decides that he's going to return to the building and confront Rebecca again. Now, he later told a psychiatrist, Dr. Park Dietz, that he only returned because he had a CD and a note that he'd apparently forgotten to give to her in their first meeting. They had no intention whatsoever of hurting her, but the gun in his possession says otherwise. Alongside the gun, he also had a copy of The Catcher in the Rye in his possession as well. This is the same book that was found in possession of John Hinckley Jr., who was Ronald Reagan's shooter and who had an infatuation with Jodie Foster, and Mark David Chapman, who was John Lennon's killer. There's no denying that Bardo was inspired by these guys when he did what he did. Apparently, in the minutes before his shooting, Bardo actually called his sister in Tennessee and tells her vaguely of his plans, but not enough for her to fully understand what he's about to do. It's highly likely that his sister would have just kind of brushed this off as Robert being weird again. I mean, Robert was weird. He never actually had murdered anyone before, so no one could have imagined that he was actually going to kill someone. Now, when Rebecca's doorbell rings for the second time that day, once again she assumes that it's her delivery of the Godfather script, but instead it's Bardo waiting again. She's still in her dressing gown. She's having just quite a chilled day, and she's so mad that this guy has the gall to turn up on her doorstep once again. I mean, it's weird, isn't it? And in Bardot's words, she had this kid voice, sounded like a little brat or something, said I was wasting her time. Wasting her time? No matter what, I thought that was a very callous thing to say to a fan, you know? I grabbed the door, gun still in the bag, and I grab it by the trigger. I come around and kapow. She's like screaming, and it's like, oh god. He shoots her in the chest twice at point blank range, and she's still stood in her doorway in her dressing gown. He quickly flees the scene, but later says that as she fell, she was screaming, why? And it actually takes him a second to decide like what he wants to do now. Like, does he kill himself? Does he shoot himself in the head and dramatically fall on top of her? He's kind of envisioning a Romeo and Juliet type situation. But instead, he runs. Now, a neighbour of Rebecca's called Richard Goldman actually hears the two shots and hears Rebecca's blood-curdling screams, and he rushes to her door. He finds her still in her dressing gown, lying on the floor, her body twitching, with her feet wedged between the door and the door frame. He checks for a pulse but can't find anything, and he rushes to call 911. Rebecca's rushed to the Cedars-Sinai Medical Centre, where she's clinging on to life for about half an hour before eventually being pronounced dead. The next day, back in Tucson, several motorists call 911 to report a man running in traffic on Interstate 10, and this guy is like pretty obviously trying to get hit by cars. Police arrive at the scene and arrest this guy, who is none other than Robert Bardo, and he tells them completely sort of like unprovoked that he's just stunned and saddened by the death of Rebecca Schaeffer, and this immediately incriminates him. Like, that's very, very weird. And alongside this as well, Bardo's sister in Tennessee actually hears about the murder and contacts the police about her brother, saying about the letter she'd received a few days earlier and about the weird phone call, and she's kind of like putting pieces together. Arizona police fax a photo of Bardo to LA, and witnesses very quickly confirm his identity. It turns out in the 18 months before Rebecca was murdered, Bardo had been arrested 3 times for disorderly conduct and domestic violence. On his most recent charge, he'd actually been sentenced to an unsupervised counselling program, which he'd never turn up to. Neighbours also had reported his very weird behaviour in the few months before her death. He apparently confronted teenage girls on the street, just like screaming at these random teenage girls. He would yell racist insults at Latino men, and he'd threaten to shoot them. And there was a lot of very weird stuff going on with Bardo in the months leading up to Rebecca's death, and it kind of like, you wonder why nobody actually did anything about it. Bardo is extradited to California, and he's charged with first-degree murder. And the prosecutor in this case would be none other than Marsha Clark, who would shoot to fame years later in the 90s when she prosecutes O.J. Simpson. Marsha's office actually pushes for a bench trial in this case, meaning that the outcome is to be decided by a judge rather than a jury, and Bardo agrees to this as long as the death penalty is completely taken off the table, so that's what they do. Bardo had fully confessed by this point to pretty much everything, but he still decides to plead not guilty to first-degree murder, saying that the killing was not premeditated, although it's pretty clear there was. He went there with a gun and a copy of The Catcher in the Rye. But also, in a surprising twist, he doesn't opt for the insanity plea either, which he probably actually could have gotten away with. Regardless, his public defender actually calls witnesses to testify about his unstable mental conditions as part of his defence, including his brother and sister, who actually say that he had to be pulled out of high school on a couple of occasions to get mental help. But Marsha had 2 main challenges in court. To prove that he hadn't acted intentionally, but he had still killed her, would give him 25 years in prison, but he would actually be eligible for parole. But to get rid of that possibility, she had to prove that there were special circumstances here, that he was lying in wait, that he was intending to kill her. Before his court case, Bardo had spent hours and hours being interviewed by Dr. Dietz, all of which was taped. And so Marsha watches all of these tapes to try and find anything that would sort of like incriminate himself, prove that he'd planned to do this. And one tape shows Bardo acting out how he had actually gone on to murder her. And at one point he's doing like hand gestures behind his back, which showed that the entire time that he was speaking to her, he actually had the gun behind his back, meaning that he did intend to do this. This was pre-planned. And Marsha does her job correctly, because in October 1991, he's found guilty and charged to life in prison with no chance of parole. He tells the judge in court, "The idea that I killed her for fame is totally ridiculous. I do realise the magnitude of what I've done. I don't think it needs to be compounded by a bunch of lies because she's an actress." But there's no denying that Robert Bardo had an obsession with famous faces, and famous faces only. There's no records I could find of his obsession ever actually reaching regular girls that he knew in his regular life. He liked the unobtainability of famous people because it meant that he couldn't be rejected on the same level that he could with normal girls. And perhaps as well, he did crave the limelight for himself. He wanted to climb out of his own anonymity. He did exactly what he did to Rebecca because she was an actress. So him saying that it's all a bunch of lies because she was an actress, it makes no sense, because he did what he did to her because she was an actress. In later interviews, Bardo would go on to say, "I was a fan of hers and I may have carried it too far, but a lot of things have appeared in the press to make me out to be a monster. If I had one wish, where if it was to ever come true, it would be for Rebecca Schaeffer to still be alive today." But it's his actions that mean that she isn't alive today. I find it so frustrating when killers say this, like, if I could just go back in time, I wouldn't do what I did, but you did do it, and you intentionally did it. There were so many warning signs that showed that he was a danger to Rebecca, and none of these signs were ever really picked up by anyone, and she was failed. But in a way, Bardo got what he wanted. Now he will go down in history linked intrinsically to Rebecca Schaeffer. As long as Rebecca's name is mentioned, so will Robert Bardo's. In 2007, Bardo was actually stabbed 11 times in prison by a fellow inmate, but somehow he managed to survive the attack. As of this year, he is serving a sentence at the Untitled State Prison in California, and he will most likely remain there until he eventually dies. He actually draws artwork from prison, various portraits of other celebrities and killers, Jennifer Aniston, Taylor Swift, even John Wayne Gacy, and infuriatingly, several drawings of Rebecca Schaeffer. It makes me so mad that you can take this young girl's life away and then have the audacity to like go on and draw her. There's just something about that I really, really hate. But if there's one silver lining to be taken from Rebecca's death, it's that it was a tipping point. Up until this point, stalking wasn't illegal, and the LAPD realised that something needed to be done about this. And this was fueled by some of the most well-known figures in Hollywood who all stood up and said, like, Rebecca's case isn't an isolated case. This is the kind of thing that happens to every single famous person in Hollywood. Rebecca Stalker just took it one step further. Up until this point, stalking was just brushed off as being part of the job. If you want to be famous, if you want to be an actress, if you want to be a singer, stalking just comes along with that. I mean, this is something that I even hear just doing YouTube today. According to some, because I do what I do, I should expect to receive hate, to have weird people messaging me. And I'm a very relatively small YouTuber, but I can relate to this. And I can't imagine the level on which that would be if I was a Hollywood celebrity and known by millions and millions, possibly even billions of people. In 1989, the LAPD created the Threat Management Unit, who were the first police team ever to specialise solely in stalking cases. They also passed a law which closed the loophole allowing the DMV to give out people's addresses. And slowly this sort of rippled throughout the rest of the USA. And by 1993, every single state had anti-stalking laws in place. And stalking became defined as someone who willfully, maliciously and repeatedly follows or harasses another victim and makes a credible threat with the intent to place the victim or the victim's immediate family in fear of their safety. And this doesn't just constitute physical stalking, just being followed down the street, like it involves letters and any other kind of communication as well. And there has to be at least 2 separate instances to constitute stalking, and it has to show a continuity of purpose as well. The California law was passed in 1990 and it became effective from the first day of 1991. And of course this doesn't offer complete protection. You still hear stories today about people being stalked and failed by the law. It happens. But this is something that was more than what it was when Rebecca was alive. Her death sparked this. But the scariest thing is, Rebecca probably wouldn't have ever had any use of these laws, because the likelihood is she would have had no idea she was being stalked until the day she died. And that is the story of Rebecca Schaeffer. It was a senseless death, but one which has possibly led to the safety of thousands of others. If you would like to see more of these videos, make sure you click the subscribe button down below and give this video a thumbs up. And thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye guys.